So I'm mostly of two minds on Mr. Brightside. On one hand, let the college kids have fun, but what about the sensitive young ears? Is it too profane? Is it little brother energy? Let's talk about the great Mr. Brightside debate right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters, I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso, and a father who has dispensed with his young child. Yes, exit stage left, young one, so we can have a more adult discussion about Mr. Brightside. Is it too profane? Is it little brother energy to always focus so much on Kansas? Also, I want to talk about Missouri's supposedly easy football schedule. I'll just say it's navigable, and that's not semantics. That really is an important distinction. I'll tell you why later here in the show, but let's start by talking about Mr. Brightside because, something actually over the NBA playoffs reminded me of this whole debate, which has been going online now for quite a while, I would say the last couple years, between Mizzou fans, especially online. But something that really triggered this was when the New York Knicks were beating the Indiana Pacers last month, and there was a pretty funny moment, in my opinion, where down the stretch the Knicks were shooting free throws, closing out the game, and, well, there was a very loud chant in Madison Square Garden that went, F you, Reggie. Except, well, they didn't say F. They said the actual profane word there. And frankly, I thought it was hilarious, especially because Reggie Miller looked incredibly awkward during that moment. Honestly, corporate Reggie, come on, just embrace it a little bit. You're the guy who put his arms around his neck in order to taunt Spike Lee. You're the guy who took a bow to all four corners of the court after a buzzer beater one time. What happened to the rogue Reggie Miller that I grew up with? But seriously, if I were Reggie, I would have absolutely laughed at that and taken it as a profound compliment that after nearly 30 some odd years, that the Knicks fans still care that much, that they're still that irritated at me for being a thorn in their side. That's to me is just beautiful and part of the fun of sports. But obviously there are some people who will say, now come on, you can't be cursing at basketball games. There are children in the crowd, all that good stuff. And I have to admit, as somebody who is now a grown man with kids and all that good stuff, as I showed in the opening of this podcast here, I am sympathetic to that point of view, certainly more sympathetic to that point of view than when I was a 21-year-old man, for example. But to me, I'm sort of two minds on this whole Mr. Brightside thing, because on the thing where it's too profane, let's just start there. Well, to me, yeah, saying FKU, obviously that's profane. I wouldn't argue with that, but is it over the line? I guess that's the question. Well, to me, at this age, yeah, I'm not going to be chanting FKU at these games. Number one, I'm like a C-list local celebrity at this point, so that's probably not a great idea, number one. But again, just as a grown man with kids, I don't know, just not really something I should be doing at this point in my life. But again, the key point there is at this point in my life. If I were a student, as I was, of course, I was a Mizzou student at one point, I think I would rather enjoy the FKU chants. I would absolutely embrace that energy. And to the people, mostly the younger people, speaking of, newer Mizzou fans who may not have been around as much as I was for all of the great moments in Missouri-KU rivalry history, well, to those who say it's sort of little brother energy to be bringing up Kansas all the time, with all due respect, I think there is a bit of a generation gap here. I think anybody who's my age totally understands why mocking Kansas at all times is not only acceptable. I think the great Norm Stewart would also agree with me that really it's sort of your duty as a Missouri fan to be constantly mocking all things Kansas. That's just my humble opinion. So to me, I totally get the people who maybe are a little bit turned off by it. To those people, I would just say, that's just for the kids. Let the kids have their kid moments, do their kid thing. Similarly to when I was in college, I rushed the field when Missouri beat Nebraska in football in 2003. Around that same time, Missouri finally took down Oklahoma in basketball. And guess what? I rushed the Hearn Center court with my fellow students for that ball game. And since I've left the University of Missouri as a student, well, you won't find my behind on rushing a court, storming a field, any of that good stuff. There's a time and place for everything. To me, it's called college, right? So the FU, Reggie, FKU, all the F words you can possibly conjure, well, just leave it to the college kids. I'm okay with that. As a grown adult, I think that time has passed me up, I got to say. Now, when it comes to Mizzou's 2024 football schedule, a lot has been made already about the Tigers having an easy schedule, at least relatively speaking. And that is becoming somewhat of a narrative already before the Tigers have even played a game. If you look at the most vocal members of, say, the opposing fan bases for Missouri, Oklahoma in particular, I would say. But one thing I've tried to do on this program is put Missouri's quote-unquote easy schedule into context. I would more say that it's navigable. Yes, compared to certainly what it could be, compared to what Florida has to go up against in its SEC schedule, what Oklahoma has to go against in its rookie season in the SEC, if you will. Yeah, no doubt, Missouri has an easier draw than that. But to call it easy is actually doing Missouri probably a bit of a disservice. So let's put this into context and why this isn't just an argument about semantics here. This really does matter. Because why does it matter? Well, my whole thing has been 10-2, Missouri, basically no matter how you get there. I think Missouri, if they're 10-2, they're going to make the 12-team playoff. Now, certainly they could be on the edge there, no doubt about it. So when you're looking at the teams that would compare to Missouri, well, you're probably saying to yourself, aha, that's where Missouri could get screwed. In fact, Mike Palmer on YouTube says, John, I agree. We make the playoff if we finish 11-2 and second in the SEC. Disagree that we make the playoff if we go 10-2 and both of those losses are to Bama and Oklahoma. To your point about the total resume, the rest of our schedule is trash and middling SEC teams. Sorry, A&M. Those two games are the entire season. See, I just have to disagree with you here, and here's why. Because let's just take an objective measure here. Now, strength of schedule at this point in the process is obviously just that. It's all projections. This can change pretty dramatically by the end of next November, for example. But just looking at ESPN's Football Power Index, they have a strength of schedule measure for the upcoming season right now. No surprise if you're following this closely. The Florida Gators have the toughest schedule in the country, according to this metric. Well, in fact, if you look at the SEC, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 of the top 10 toughest schedules in the conference are from the SEC. Let me say that again. 9 of the top 10 toughest schedules in the country are projected to be from the Southeastern Conference. So Missouri, yes, statistically have the easiest schedule projected in the SEC. But that's good for 29th in the entire country. That's still a much above average schedule. For example, Missouri's projected schedule is still harder than every single team in the Big 12. Why does that matter? Well, it's quite possible that a team like West Virginia, Kansas State, whoever it might be, could be competing for Missouri for that final spot. You look at the ACC. The only teams in the Atlantic Coast Conference that have a tougher projected schedule than Missouri are Stanford, Georgia Tech, and Clemson. And none of them are it's not by much either, with the exception of Georgia Tech, who has an incredibly hard schedule, largely based on that non-conference annual game with the Georgia Bulldogs. So here's the thing. Georgia Tech, not likely to be competing for a spot in the college football playoff. Same thing with Stanford. Could Clemson? Sure, that's a possibility. But again, Clemson has the 26th projected schedule, Missouri 29th. That's not exactly a lot to write home about. So to me, I still think I'm going to have to disagree. Hey, Mike, love you for listening, watching, all that good stuff. I'm going to disagree with your disagreement. I think at 10-2, even with losses to Bama and Oklahoma, that's good enough for Missouri to get in the 12-team playoff. I really believe that. And you know what? Coming up here, let's take more of a deep dive into Luther Burden and his chances, at least in my opinion, his chances for the Heisman Trophy. It's going to hinge actually more on special teams, in my opinion, than it will his receiving ability. Also, Missouri offers a quarterback who's in 8th grade. What in the world are we doing here? Well, let's talk about that and more coming up here in just a little bit. But you know what? If you've been watching the U.S. Open, you've been hearing PXG say nobody makes golf clubs like we do, period. And you know what? They're absolutely right. They made me a believer. I felt it for myself when I swung the new PXG Black Ops driver, a total game changer. You no longer have to sacrifice distance for forgiveness. And here's the thing. No matter how good of tools you have, getting fitted can take your game to a whole new level, and they'll even give you a dozen free golf balls just for doing it. When I went in, hit on their TrackMan for a while, for probably a good hour or so, a nice long session, Jacob had me nicely dialed in on the Black Ops. Man, I absolutely love that thing. Feels tremendous in my hands. I feel like I can swing easy and still just get tremendous distance out of it. PXG made me a believer, and they'll do the same for every golfer in Kansas City. Visit pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting at PXG Kansas City. It's 7517 West 119th Street in Overland Park. Get fitted for any club, and you'll get a dozen golf balls free. That's pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou to schedule your fitting. pxg.com/LockedOnMizzou. Limit 1 dozen golf balls per person. Promotion ends June 30th. Other terms and conditions may apply. See store for details. And passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With more than 122 million parts, for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Well, it's always nice to get a message out there from the 4%, as I like to call them. Yes, the 4% of this audience that is, in fact, a female. So from Sarah Lang on YouTube, she says, prediction: Luther Burden will not be high on the Heisman Trophy without returning punts. Punt returns for a touchdown are highlights that quarterbacks cannot match. Well, Sarah, you are incredibly smart, and that's why you're in this audience, because I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying. I don't really think Burden has a chance if he's not returning punts with a decent amount of regularity. Most importantly, And many people have pointed this out, by the way, but history says that wide receivers do not often win the Heisman Trophy. But it has happened. It's just rare. But it has happened before. There is precedent for it. And usually when a wide receiver wins the Heisman Trophy, indeed, the return game is a huge part of it. You look back to Tim Brown at Notre Dame all those years ago. I believe it was against Michigan, where he had a nationally televised, night game punt return for a touchdown. Maybe it may have even brought 2 back to the house in that game. And that was a huge, huge part of the reason why he got all the hype that he did that ended up with him winning the Heisman Trophy. Same deal, obviously, with Desmond Howard. Even Charles Woodson, a guy who played on both sides of the ball, was also a punt returner, kick returner type guy as well, made some stuff happen in multiple aspects of the game. I would say, hey, if you think about it, that means that if Colorado is actually half decent this year, if they're a surprisingly good, maybe 8-9 win type team, that means Travis Hunter actually has a decent shot, history says. But Sarah, I totally agree. If Luther Burden is going to win the Heisman Trophy, and if he's going to end up actually giving you value in the long run, and if he is, that's really the only way, unless you sell your ticket to somebody down the road. But for as much as I talk about, hey, he's 100-1, that's good value in my opinion. Well, he actually has to win the award, right? And if he's going to win the award, I'd say it's almost certain that against Alabama or against Oklahoma, maybe Texas A&M, some kind of big-time game when it's maybe the fourth quarter coming down to it, if Luther Burden can take back a punt to the house to basically win the game for the Tigers, well, there it is. There's your Heisman Trophy moment. And I think without that, you're probably right. Just the receiving stats alone probably aren't going to be enough to overtake the big-name quarterbacks in this country. So Sean Williams over at Power Mizzou was giving a recruiting update. And according to Williams, and I'm going to leave the young man's name out here because I don't want to be a hypocrite and be part of the problem here. And again, this isn't necessarily a criticism of Sean Williams by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just more asking, what in the world are we doing here in college football? Because according to Williams, this young man camped at Missouri last week and picked up an offer in the process. The quarterback, a 2028 prospect, already has a handful of Power 4 offers and will be one of the top talents in his class. So 2028 class, huh? Let's do the math here, because the current class we're recruiting of 2025, well, they have not even entered their senior year of high school yet. So if you're in 2028, that means you have not even entered 9th grade yet. That means that this kid is in 8th grade. Yes, if you have not stepped foot in 9th grade, I don't care if you've graduated from junior high yet. In my book, you're still an 8th grader. Missouri is, and by the way, offering an 8th grader, the idea that is a committable scholarship offer, that if this young man just said, oh, yeah, cool, yeah, I'm going to Missouri, sounds good, the Tigers would immediately go, well, wait a second, we didn't mean it was a committable offer. So all of this nonsense, all of these offers that are thrown out, especially early in the process, it's just all just a bunch of BS, to be completely honest with you. It's like, and so are these photo shoots and these where expensive cars are brought out onto the field and kids are putting on jewelry and acting like they're in rap videos and what have you, all this stuff. It's all just a bunch of complete fake nonsense. And guess what? So are scholarship offers at this point. Unless you can commit on the spot, well, then that's not really a scholarship offer. But it sounds really cool when you can tell your 8th grade classmates, hey, baby, I got an offer from Missouri. Would you like to go to the Sadie Hawkins dance with me? That type of deal. I just don't find any of this process all that it's just slimy. Let's put it that way, the entire process. And it's one thing if, Missouri coaches or something like that, they see some kid of the 2028 class who looks like a heck of a prospect. Maybe you go say hi, shake his hand or whatever. But this thing of, hey, here's a scholarship offer. The kid's in 8th grade. Can we stop, please? What are we doing here? I just find that stuff kind of mind-boggling, I have to be honest. And after a few months of speculation and absence, we now know for certain that one Missouri Tiger is going to be coming back next season for Dennis Gates and his basketball team. I'll tell you about that after these quick words. And has long been suspected, but yet to be confirmed, at least until yesterday, Caleb Grill, his medical hardship has officially been approved, so he is going to return for the Tigers for one final season in 24-25. Obviously I talked yesterday about how last season was, for a number of different reasons, it was basically the season from hell where basically everything went wrong. Well, one of the biggest things that went wrong was Caleb Grill landing hard on that wrist, and we never saw him play basketball last season after that. I thought Grill's presence, not only as a shooter and a defender, especially as a rebounder, he was just the type of hustle player, and I mean this in the nicest way possible. As a Missouri fan, Caleb Grill can be an irritant as well, an irritant for the opposition, the type of guy that fans love, but opposing players and teams and fans especially tend to hate. So to me, obviously good news for Caleb Grill and Missouri for this upcoming season. And his experience is something I think obviously Dennis Gates is going to lean on heavily, as he has in his first two seasons at Missouri. And speaking of leaning on experience, that's really something that's become a trend throughout college basketball and college football as well. College football's always been the case that way, I think, but especially with the portal, I think, with the free transfers that are now available, coaches who lately, hey, all the talk has been one and done, blah, blah, blah. Well, a lot of coaches, John Calipari included, the one and done master, are having to learn how to lean on experience a lot more. And that's happening in college football as well, to the point where, frankly, opportunities for high school recruits are starting to dry up. If you listen to a lot of coaches, for example, The Athletic just had talked to some anonymous coaches in the Chicagoland area up in northern Illinois. One coach said his recruiting traffic compared to pre-NIL has drastically dropped, for example. It's a smaller pool that are being recruited because of the portal. And it's actually helping like MAC schools, in this coach's opinion, as the MAC schools that recruit his area telling me that they're getting more quality players than they would have in the pre-portal environment, because so many colleges are going to the portal and skipping a lot of high school kids that they may have taken in the past. So it's really just an interesting time here, without question. I mean, another coach says, hey, coach, we've got 25 spots, but 12 of them are only going to be high school kids. In some programs, it might even be less than that. It might be as few as 10 guys being taken, whereas in the past, it was 20 to 25 high schoolers basically each and every year. And now that's, like these coaches are saying, it's basically getting cut in half. That's sort of the give and take, the trade with the free opportunities, because on one level, I think it is good for kids who were under-recruited coming out of high school, whether it's because of geography or maybe they just were late bloomers as athletes, but as now sophomores in college, well, they're actually far better and should be at a higher level of basketball. Well, in the educational system, if you want to transfer up to a higher level of learning, to a higher program, a higher university, because for whatever reason, maybe you're a late bloomer, maybe you just got interested in something and suddenly your abilities are surpassing where you are, well, they don't make you sit out for an entire year and academically, do they? So the idea of making people sit out a season for all of this, it does seem somewhat antiquated and silly in a lot of ways, and it definitely hurts the late bloomer types and the people who have, for whatever reason, have exceeded their previous abilities. But again, there is a cost there, and there are less opportunities for high schoolers coming out of college. Sometimes they'll just have to work a little harder, maybe at a lower level, and then transfer a year or two later. That's just the new reality for good, bad, or indifferent. So all this is very interesting to me. Hopefully this has been an interesting episode of Locked On Mizzou to you. Got 5 in the can this week. Probably looking at 3 the next couple weeks per week into off-season mode here officially on Locked On Mizzou. So thanks for being patient with me. As always, apologies for messing up the video there for a few minutes in the first segment. At least we recovered, by golly. You got to dust yourself off. That's all I can say. So until next time, I am John Miller, and thanks as always for listening to Locked On Mizzou.